18 years ago, 3 innocent lives entered the world under circumstances that would shape their futures in unimaginable ways. Born at St. Joseph's Medical Center in Charleston, South Carolina, the triplets, a boy and 2 girls, cried out as they took their first breaths. Their skin was a rich, deep brown, gleaming under the fluorescent lights of the delivery room, their tiny faces full of innocence and hope. However, the joy that should have filled the air quickly dissipated the moment their parents, Thomas and Elizabeth Warren, laid eyes on them. Elizabeth gasped, her breath catching in her throat as she saw her children for the first time. Her eyes widened in disbelief, unable to process what she was seeing. She looked to her husband, Thomas, hoping for some sign of reassurance, but instead, she saw him standing rigidly, pale and motionless. His fists were clenched, his body tense with shock. He didn't step forward to hold his children, he didn't speak a word. His silence, thick and suffocating, filled the room, and Elizabeth could feel the weight of his rejection pressing down on her. The nurse, sensing the tension, attempted to ease the discomfort by softly commenting, "They're beautiful," but her words fell flat, offering no comfort. Elizabeth, her shoulders trembling with emotion, took a tentative step towards the babies, her fingers hovering above them but never quite touching. The deep discomfort and disbelief weighed so heavily on her that she pulled back, unable to bridge the distance between herself and the children she had just given birth to. Thomas's cold, final voice broke through the silence, "We need time to think." His words were harsh, devoid of any warmth or empathy. With that, he turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway as he left his wife behind. Elizabeth stood frozen, her chest tight, watching him leave. Her feet felt rooted to the floor, paralyzed by the sheer weight of the situation. She couldn't bring herself to follow him. Her mind was numb, her world collapsing in on itself. The nurses, unsure of what to do next, tried to place the babies in Elizabeth's arms, but she shook her head, her eyes vacant and distant. "I just need a moment," she whispered, her voice small and broken. With that, she turned away, leaving the babies alone in their cribs, their tiny hands instinctively reaching out for one another in search of comfort. But no one came. The triplets were left in the nursery, nameless and abandoned, their cries echoing in the empty room, and the world outside seemed unaware of their plight. That night, Thomas and Elizabeth made their decision. They refused to see their children again, signing away their parental rights in cold, hasty strokes on the adoption papers. Thomas muttered, "It's impossible," his jaw clenched, unable to face the reality of his own actions. Elizabeth, her heart shattering with each word, could not bring herself to scream or demand answers. She was consumed by fear and shame. As she signed the papers, her tears blurred her vision, and she set the pen down with a heavy heart, walking away without a second glance. The hospital staff, having witnessed this tragic scene, whispered in the halls. Some speculated about hidden genetic traits, about ancestry that had resurfaced unexpectedly, while others murmured about the shame and fear that had led to this abandonment. But no one truly understood. The triplets were left behind, their future uncertain, their bond unbroken. Though they were alone, their journey was far from over. Little did anyone know, destiny had a different plan for them. In the quiet town of Somerville, the news about the abandoned triplets spread rapidly, quickly reaching David and Naomi Turner. The couple had been trying for years to start a family of their own, but despite their deep longing, their efforts had been in vain. Their home was filled with love, but their arms remained empty. Naomi, in particular, felt the ache of motherhood in her bones, a longing she carried every day. She had always dreamed of the day she would hold her own child, but it seemed as though that dream would never come true. When Naomi first heard about the triplets, 3 babies who had been abandoned at birth simply because they didn't look like their parents, her heart broke. She felt an overwhelming surge of sympathy for the little ones, knowing that their lives had begun in such a cruel, unjust way. It was a kind of hurt she understood all too well, the kind of pain that never seemed to go away. She told David the story, and as soon as he heard it, he too was struck by the sadness of the situation. But what struck him even more was the look in Naomi's eyes, a mixture of compassion and determination. He could see that the deep ache in her heart had suddenly shifted into a feeling of purpose. "We need to help them," Naomi whispered, almost to herself, as her voice trembled with emotion. David, always attuned to her feelings, immediately nodded in agreement. He could feel the pull in his own heart. They had always wanted to be parents, but their path had never been easy. Now, here was an opportunity that seemed almost too perfect to pass up. Not only could they offer a home to children who needed one, but they could also give these babies the love they had always dreamed of sharing. They made up their minds in that moment. They were going to meet the triplets, no matter what. They didn't know exactly how things would turn out, but they knew they couldn't walk away. It felt like a calling, and they couldn't ignore it. With nervous anticipation in their hearts, they drove to St. Joseph's Medical Center. The hospital had become a symbol of heartbreak for the triplets, who had been abandoned by the very people who were supposed to care for them. But for David and Naomi, it was the place where their future as a family would begin. When they arrived, their nerves were palpable, but they remained resolute. A nurse led them through the hallways, her face full of quiet hope. "They've been together since birth," she said softly, guiding them into the nursery. "They only sleep when they're touching. It's like they already know they need each other." David and Naomi stood by the crib, staring down at the three babies who lay there, side by side. The sight was overwhelming, three tiny faces, so small and delicate, their dark eyes closed in peaceful slumber. The babies seemed so innocent, so perfect, despite everything they had already been through. It was clear that they shared an unspoken bond, one that no one could break. Naomi felt her heart swell, her chest tight with emotion. She reached out her hand, trembling, to gently touch the cheek of the little boy lying in the center of the crib. His skin was soft, warm to the touch. "Caleb," she whispered, the name coming to her as if it had been destined all along. David stood quietly beside her, his throat tight with emotion. He looked down at the first girl, her face soft and serene, her tiny lips curled in a peaceful sigh. "Chloe," he murmured, the name feeling just as natural as the one Naomi had chosen. His heart swelled with a love he hadn't expected to feel so deeply in such a short amount of time. Finally, their gaze shifted to the last baby, a girl who lay pressed closely to her siblings. Her face was peaceful, her small body nestled against the others as if she had always known that she was meant to be with them. "Mia," Naomi whispered, her voice breaking as the name came to her like a revelation. It felt right. The three children, Caleb, Chloe, and Nia, were meant to be theirs. David, still gazing down at the three babies, turned to Naomi. "They stay together," he said, his voice firm with resolve. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. He knew, in his heart, that these three children belonged together, and they needed to stay together. "We're their family now." Naomi nodded, tears falling freely down her face. She could feel the weight of the decision, but it was a weight she was more than willing to bear. "Yes," she whispered, "all three of them." In that moment, they knew their lives would never be the same. Within a matter of weeks, the adoption was finalized, and the triplets, once abandoned and alone, were brought home to Somerville. The house that had once felt empty now rang with laughter and joy, a place where Caleb, Chloe, and Nia would grow up surrounded by the love and security they had always deserved. The Turners, once a couple longing for children, were now a family, and their lives, full of hope and new beginnings, were just beginning to unfold. The days that followed the adoption were a whirlwind of change for David and Naomi, each day a mixture of joy and challenges. Their home, once silent and empty, now echoed with the soft sounds of tiny voices, giggles, and cries. The transition was not easy, but it was filled with moments of warmth and love that made every sleepless night and overwhelming day worth it. Naomi, though initially daunted by the task ahead, found herself deeply connected to the triplets. The joy of holding them, comforting them when they cried, and seeing them begin to thrive was a reward that softened every difficulty. Caleb, the eldest, was gentle and affectionate, always looking to Naomi with trusting eyes. He would reach out for her, pulling himself up into her arms and resting his head on her chest as if he instinctively knew he was safe. Chloe, quieter and more reserved, would curl up next to Naomi, seeking the comfort of her touch when the world felt too overwhelming. Nia, the youngest, was full of energy and determination. From the start, her fiery spirit was evident, as she would struggle to keep up with her siblings but never gave up, always pushing forward, her small hands gripping onto Naomi's fingers with an unwavering strength that made Naomi's heart swell. David, too, was navigating the overwhelming responsibility of fatherhood. He had always wanted to be a father, but nothing had prepared him for the responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. There were moments when he felt inadequate. He would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of one of the babies crying and, for a brief moment, wonder if he was doing it right. But the moment he looked at the three of them, he knew he was doing exactly what he needed to do. The trust they had in him, the way they looked at him with innocent eyes, was a reminder that love transcended everything. Every giggle, every reach for him, every attempt to crawl towards him was a sign that he was doing the right thing. He had become the protector, the one who would keep them safe no matter the circumstances, and it was a role he accepted with all his heart. He found peace in Naomi's steady and nurturing presence, as she would often calm his worries with a simple touch or a quiet word of reassurance. Together, they were a team, navigating the complexities of raising 3 children at once, each with their unique needs, but all sharing the same desire for love and security. Despite the deep bond growing between them, there were moments when Naomi found herself reflecting on the past. She would often think of the parents who had abandoned the babies, wondering what could have led them to make such a heart-wrenching decision. The pain they had felt in leaving their own flesh and blood behind, simply because the babies didn't look like them, lingered in Naomi's mind. She couldn't help but wonder if the triplets ever thought about their birth parents, even though they were too young to voice those thoughts. Naomi and David were determined to fill the void left by those who had walked away, but they both understood that their love, though strong, could never completely erase the hurt and confusion the triplets may have felt from their abandonment. As the weeks turned into months, the triplets began to develop their unique personalities. Caleb's calm and empathetic nature grew stronger with each passing day, while Chloe's quiet curiosity blossomed as she explored the world around her. Nia, always the most defiant, showed her fearless spirit by running after her siblings, trying to keep up despite her small frame. Watching them grow, David and Naomi couldn't help but imagine their future together. Naomi dreamed of taking them to the beach, feeling the warmth of the sun on their faces as they played in the sand. David pictured them growing into strong, independent individuals who would face the world with the same love and confidence they had been given. Despite the challenges they faced, the couple was filled with hope for the future, knowing they were giving the triplets a foundation of love, security, and support. Yet, even as the family settled into their new life, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty about what lay ahead. She knew that the triplets would eventually have questions about their birth parents. They would wonder about the people who had abandoned them, and there would be a point when the questions would become more than just curiosity, they would become a need for closure. Naomi and David were prepared for that day, knowing that the answers they could provide would never be enough to erase the pain of abandonment. But they were ready to face it, together as a family. The love they had for the triplets would guide them through any difficulty, and Naomi knew that as long as they stood united, they would weather any storm. As the triplets celebrated their first birthday, surrounded by balloons, cake, and the loving arms of their new parents, David and Naomi took a moment to reflect. The house that had once been quiet and empty was now alive with energy and laughter, a true home. The 3 babies who had once been abandoned, left to face the world alone, were now surrounded by the kind of love and joy that would carry them through life. David and Naomi exchanged a glance, their hearts swelling with pride and gratitude. They had given these children a home, yes, but in return, the triplets had given them a family, a purpose, and a love that would last forever. The journey had been long and full of uncertainty, but in that moment, David and Naomi knew that they had made the right choice. They were no longer just parents by adoption, they were parents by love, by choice, and by an unbreakable bond that would define their family for years to come. As the months passed, Naomi and David's bond with the triplets deepened, and the family settled into a rhythm, though the challenges of raising 3 young children never fully eased. Naomi often found herself overwhelmed by the constant demands, the sleepless nights, and the whirlwind of feeding, changing, and comforting. But every time she looked into the eyes of Caleb, Chloe, and Nia, her heart swelled with love. Caleb's quiet affection, his gentle nature, was a source of comfort. He was always the first to reach out, offering his tiny hands to Naomi as if he instinctively knew that she was the one who would always be there for him. Chloe, who had once been reserved, had started to show more of her personality, her eyes lighting up when she saw Naomi. There was something special about Chloe's gaze, a deep trust, as if she knew her world was safe and filled with love. And then there was Nia, full of energy and determination, a constant reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Despite her small size, Nia's willpower to keep up with her siblings was inspiring. She would try to crawl or walk before she was ready, her determination shining through every attempt. Naomi couldn't help but smile at her fiery spirit, knowing that this little girl would grow to be strong and confident. David, too, had come into his own as a father. Initially unsure, he had gradually embraced the role with all his heart. He would often catch himself staring at the triplets, amazed by how much they had already grown. There were moments of doubt, moments when he questioned if he was doing enough, but in the quiet, peaceful moments when he held the triplets in his arms, all his insecurities faded away. He was their protector, their father, and he would do everything in his power to provide for them. Naomi, sensing his occasional doubts, would reassure him with a smile, a gentle touch, or a quiet word. They were in this together, and no matter what challenges arose, they would face them as a team. It wasn't always easy, but the love they shared for the triplets and for each other made every struggle worth it. Despite the deepening connection between Naomi, David, and the triplets, there was an unspoken understanding that the journey was not over. They knew that the triplets would eventually ask about their birth parents. They would wonder why they had been abandoned and why they had been left in a place where no one had wanted them. Naomi and David had always promised to be honest with the children, but the thought of answering those difficult questions filled them with a sense of dread. They couldn't erase the pain of abandonment, and no amount of love could change that. Still, they knew that when the time came, they would face it together, just as they had faced every other challenge. Their love for the triplets was unwavering, and it was that love that would guide them through the difficult conversations ahead. As the triplets approached their second birthday, the couple began to think about their future. They dreamed of the day when they could take the triplets to the park, watch them play and explore the world with the innocence that only a child possesses. Naomi often imagined the laughter of the triplets echoing through the house as they grew older, each of them carving out their own path in the world, yet always staying close to the love that had brought them together. David, too, imagined their future, one where the triplets would grow up surrounded by love, support, and the strength of their family. They would know who they were and where they came from, and they would never have to question their place in the world. The love that Naomi and David had for them would be the foundation that would carry them through life's challenges, and as parents, that was the greatest gift they could give. On the eve of their second birthday, Naomi and David sat together, watching the triplets sleep peacefully in their cribs. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the night. Naomi rested her head on David's shoulder, and for a moment, they both reflected on how far they had come. From the initial uncertainty and fear to the overwhelming joy and love that had filled their lives, it had been a journey they would never trade. The road ahead was still uncertain, but in that moment, they knew one thing for sure: they were exactly where they were meant to be. Their family, once incomplete, was now whole, and the love they had built together would see them through anything that the future might bring. As the triplets' second birthday approached, Naomi and David began to reflect on the years that had passed. The once overwhelming uncertainty that had clouded their lives now seemed like a distant memory. Their hearts swelled with gratitude as they looked at their three children, Caleb, Chloe, and Nia, who had blossomed into unique little individuals, each with their own distinct personalities. They had come so far, and yet, there was still so much ahead of them. Naomi often found herself marveling at how quickly the days had flown by, and how much they had all grown together as a family. There were still moments when the demands of parenting were exhausting, but those moments were always outweighed by the sheer joy the triplets brought into their lives. David, too, had changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. The man who had once been unsure about fatherhood now stood confidently beside Naomi, guiding their children through life with a steady hand. He found joy in the simplest moments, teaching Caleb how to tie his shoes, holding Chloe when she was upset, and running around with Nia as she tried to outpace him in the backyard. Each day, he became more certain of his role as a father. He was no longer just Naomi's partner, he was the protector, the teacher, the listener, and the unwavering support for their children. As the triplets grew, Naomi and David began to understand more about the complexities of raising children, especially ones who had come from such a painful beginning. The memories of their arrival, abandoned at the doorstep of a foster care agency, were never far from their minds. They knew that, eventually, the triplets would ask questions about their birth parents, about their past, and about why they had been left behind. Naomi and David had always promised to be honest with their children, but the thought of answering those difficult questions filled them with a mix of sadness and uncertainty. What could they say? How could they explain something that no child should ever have to understand? They didn't have all the answers, but they knew that their love for the triplets would always be the guiding light, no matter how challenging the conversations ahead might be. On the eve of the triplets' birthday, Naomi sat in the living room, looking at the small, hand-drawn birthday cards she and David had prepared. The air was filled with a sense of quiet anticipation. Tomorrow would be a day of celebration, but it would also mark the passing of another year, another milestone in their journey as parents. Naomi couldn't help but reflect on how different their lives had become. When they first received the call about the triplets, it had been a shock, a whirlwind of emotions. They hadn't known what to expect, or if they were ready for such a monumental change. But now, with every giggle, every tear, every milestone, they knew they had made the right choice. These children, their children, had completed their lives in ways they hadn't even known were possible. David joined Naomi, wrapping his arm around her as they looked at the pictures they had taken over the last 2 years. The triplets, always full of energy, never failed to surprise them with new things. There was Caleb, who had begun to speak in full sentences, always asking questions about the world around him. Chloe, with her sensitive heart, who would hold her siblings' hands when they were upset, showing an empathy beyond her years. And Nia, who was always the first to attempt something new, whether it was walking, talking, or figuring out how to climb onto the couch. Each of them, in their own way, was a reminder of the strength they had within themselves, and of the love Naomi and David had built together. "Can you believe how much they've grown?" Naomi whispered to David, her voice soft but filled with emotion. David smiled, a mixture of pride and wonder in his eyes. "They've changed our lives in ways we never imagined. But we've done it together. We've given them everything we can." Naomi nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. "And we'll keep doing it. No matter what." The sound of the triplets' laughter echoed down the hallway, and Naomi and David exchanged a look, knowing that no matter the challenges that lay ahead, they would face them together. Tomorrow, they would celebrate another year of growth, love, and joy. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that no matter what the world threw at them, they would always be a family, strong, united, and filled with an unbreakable love. The morning of the triplets' second birthday arrived, and Naomi and David woke up early, a mixture of excitement and anticipation filling the air. The house buzzed with activity as they hurried to prepare for the big day. Naomi stood in the kitchen, humming softly as she added the final touches to the birthday cake, carefully decorating it with swirls of colorful frosting. Every corner of the house had been transformed into a joyful celebration. Balloons floated in the living room, streamers hung from the ceiling, and the table was laden with treats and snacks for their guests. The smell of freshly baked cookies filled the air, making Naomi smile as she thought about how much effort she had put into making this day perfect. It was their children's second birthday, and she wanted it to be a day they would remember for years to come. As she set the cake down on the table, Naomi paused for a moment, her heart swelling with emotion. She looked around the room at the family pictures on the walls, capturing memories of their journey together. 2 years had flown by so quickly, yet in many ways, it felt like a lifetime. When they had first learned they were expecting triplets, Naomi and David had been both overwhelmed and thrilled. The pregnancy had been filled with challenges, and in the early days, they were uncertain of what the future would look like. But now, as she gazed around at the decorations and the preparations, Naomi couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. Their little family had weathered the storm, and here they were, celebrating the incredible achievements of their 3 little ones. David entered the room just as Naomi was lost in thought. His eyes softened when he saw the look on her face. He had noticed the quiet moments she had spent in reflection over the past few days, and he understood the depth of her feelings. He walked over to her, his arms wrapping around her from behind, pulling her into a warm embrace. "They're growing up so fast, aren't they?" Naomi whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she glanced toward the playroom where the triplets were playing. David smiled and nodded, his own heart full of pride and love. "It feels like just yesterday we were bringing them home from the hospital. And now look at them." He gestured toward the triplets, who were busy playing with their toys, their faces lighting up with innocent joy. Naomi's heart fluttered as she watched the 3 of them. Caleb, with his boundless curiosity, was sitting on the floor surrounded by a sea of building blocks, carefully stacking them with intense concentration. Chloe, always so gentle and thoughtful, was sitting beside him, carefully arranging her dolls in a neat row. Nia, the spirited one, was already trying to climb onto the couch, giggling at her own mischief. Naomi couldn't help but smile at how different each of them was, yet how much they complemented one another. It was as if they were each a reflection of different parts of both her and David. "They're so different from one another," Naomi continued, her voice filled with awe. "But at the same time, they're so perfectly us." David leaned in and kissed her forehead gently. "They really are. And they've come so far. From the moment they were born, we didn't know what to expect. But look at them now. They're strong, they're healthy, and they're so full of life." Naomi nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We've been through so much together," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "The sleepless nights, the worry, the uncertainty. But they've made it all worth it." David squeezed her shoulder reassuringly, a sense of deep gratitude washing over him. "We've made it all worth it, Naomi. Every moment, every challenge, it's all led to this. They're the best part of our lives." As the morning wore on, Naomi and David made final preparations for the party. The house was soon filled with the sound of laughter and chatter as friends and family arrived to celebrate the special day. The triplets were beside themselves with excitement, their little faces lighting up as they saw the cake and the balloons. Naomi and David watched as their children ran around the room, giggling with delight, their joy infectious. As the party went on, Naomi took a moment to step back and take it all in. She looked around at the people who had supported them throughout their journey, their friends, their family, their community, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This wasn't just a celebration of another year of life for the triplets, it was a celebration of their entire journey as a family. Every challenge they had faced had brought them closer together, and every triumph had made them stronger. Naomi felt incredibly proud of what they had accomplished, not just as parents, but as a family. Later in the day, as the guests began to leave and the house quieted down, Naomi and David stood together, holding their children in their arms. Their hearts were full, not just with love for their little ones, but with a deep sense of contentment and fulfillment. They had built a life together, one filled with love, laughter, and the kind of joy that only a family could bring. As they looked at their children, now 2 years old, Naomi and David knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, with strength and love. "I can't believe how much they've grown," Naomi said, her voice barely audible as she gazed at her 3 children. David nodded, his eyes soft and filled with pride. "They've grown in ways we could never have imagined. And we've grown with them." Naomi smiled, resting her head against his shoulder as they watched their children. "I'm so grateful for everything. For them, for you, for this life we've built." David kissed her cheek, his heart swelling with love. "Me too. This is just the beginning, Naomi. The best is yet to come." The sun began its slow descent behind the horizon, casting a soft, golden light that seemed to wrap the house in a gentle embrace. Naomi and David sat together on the couch, the silence around them speaking volumes. The house, which had been bustling with life and energy only hours before, was now calm, its only sound the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The party was over. The guests had slowly filed out, their laughter and chatter replaced with the comfortable quiet of the evening. There were no more distractions now, just the two of them, alone, reflecting on everything that had transpired. Naomi took a deep breath, her fingers curling around the warm mug of tea in her hands. She felt a quiet exhaustion settle into her bones, the kind that only came after days of hard work and anticipation. Her muscles were sore from all the preparations, and yet, a deep sense of contentment washed over her. The celebration for the twins' second birthday had been everything they'd hoped for, and more. The joy on the children's faces as they opened their gifts, the laughter of friends and family filling the rooms, the warmth of the shared moments, it had all been worth it. She glanced over at David, who sat beside her, his arm resting casually around her shoulders. His presence was a steady comfort. Naomi's eyes softened as she took in the familiar features of her husband, his strong jawline, the way his dark hair had started to show streaks of gray, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. Even after all these years, his gaze still held the same tenderness, the same quiet understanding that had drawn her to him in the first place. David caught her looking at him and gave her a soft smile, his voice breaking the silence. "Tired?" he asked gently, his thumb brushing against her shoulder in a tender gesture. Naomi nodded, her smile small but sincere. "Yeah. But happy," she replied, her voice carrying a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. "I didn't think we'd make it here sometimes. Do you remember the early days? When we were just trying to figure things out, barely keeping our heads above water?" David chuckled softly, his voice warm. "I remember," he said. "I remember those nights when we didn't think we'd get any sleep, when everything felt like it was happening all at once. And yet, look at us now. We've made it through everything. We're here, together. And they're growing up so well." Naomi's gaze drifted toward the playroom, where their three children, Caleb, Chloe, and Nia, had finally fallen asleep after a long day of celebration. The twins, Caleb and Chloe, were curled up together on the floor, their little faces peaceful as they slept soundly, while Nia was nestled in her crib, her tiny hands resting against her face. Naomi felt her heart swell at the sight of them, her children, her world. She had watched them grow from tiny, helpless newborns into the joyful, curious toddlers they were now. Each of them was so different, Caleb with his quiet, thoughtful nature, Chloe with her playful energy, and Nia, who had her own special way of lighting up a room with her laughter. They were her heart, and seeing them safe and sound made everything worth it. David followed her gaze, and then looked back at her with a smile. "They're amazing. We've done good, Naomi. We've given them everything they need, and more." Naomi felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so many sleepless nights worrying, wondering if she was doing enough, if she was being the kind of mother she wanted to be. But seeing her children now, so full of life, so full of love, she knew deep down that they were okay. They were more than okay. They were thriving. She had given them a home filled with warmth, love, and the kind of stability that would allow them to grow into the best versions of themselves. "I never imagined this," Naomi whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "When we started this journey, I didn't know if we'd get here. But now, seeing them like this, I can't help but feel like we've done something incredible." David leaned in closer, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "We've done it together, Naomi. All of it. We've built something beautiful, and the best part is, we're only getting started." A deep sense of peace settled over Naomi as she rested her head on his shoulder, their fingers intertwined. The weight of the day was heavy on her, but it was a comforting kind of heaviness, the kind that comes from knowing you've poured your heart and soul into something meaningful. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, they both knew that. But in that moment, as they sat together, Naomi couldn't help but feel a quiet certainty that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Together, they could handle anything. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, the sounds of the night outside filtering through the window. Naomi's thoughts wandered, and she reflected on how much had changed over the last few years. It felt like just yesterday they had been adjusting to the sleepless nights and endless days of caring for newborns, wondering if they were doing enough. And now, here they were, with 3 vibrant, healthy children. They had built something more beautiful than she could have ever imagined, a family that was strong, bound by love and the shared experiences that had shaped them all. As the night wore on, Naomi felt a sense of deep gratitude well up inside her. They had made it. They had made it through the hardest days, and now they were here, stronger than ever. And as she sat there, with David beside her and their children safe and sound, she knew that no matter what the future held, they were ready. Together, they could face anything. And that thought gave her more peace than anything else could. The best is yet to come, Naomi whispered softly, more to herself than to David. And in that moment, she believed it with all her heart. As the evening settled in, the stillness of the night seemed to wrap around the house like a soft blanket. Naomi stood by the window, the cool glass against her fingertips as she gazed out into the darkening world outside. The last traces of sunlight had long since disappeared, and the soft glow from the street lamps bathed the sidewalk in a peaceful amber hue. In the distance, the occasional car drove by, its headlights briefly illuminating the quiet streets before vanishing into the shadows. The calmness of the night was in sharp contrast to the earlier bustle of the day, and Naomi found herself momentarily lost in the tranquility, her thoughts adrift. She let out a slow breath, her chest feeling heavy yet full. The events of the day kept playing in her mind, laughter, music, the sound of the children's voices filling the house with energy. Today had been special. It was a day meant for celebration, and Naomi had poured her heart into making sure everything was perfect. She had watched her children, Caleb and Chloe, laughing and playing with their friends, their faces glowing with the kind of joy only children could express. It was a joy that filled the house, made everything feel alive, and she had basked in it. But now, as she stood by the window, that joy was slowly fading into quiet reflection. Naomi's heart swelled with pride and love for her children, yet there was a tinge of sadness that she couldn't quite shake off. Caleb and Chloe were growing so fast, each day bringing something new. Their small hands, once always reaching for her, were now beginning to stretch out toward the world beyond their home, eager to explore, to learn, to be independent. Naomi could see it in the way they spoke, the way they looked at the world, like they were beginning to understand that there was more to discover than just their cozy house and the security of her arms. She smiled softly at the thought but couldn't help feeling a pang in her chest. The thought of them growing up was both a source of immense pride and a quiet sorrow. She wanted to hold on to these moments a little longer, those fleeting moments of innocence and closeness, before they disappeared into the whirlwind of their future. How quickly time passed. One day they were babies in her arms, and the next they were running around the house, making decisions for themselves, speaking with a confidence that only came with age. The realization that she couldn't stop time, no matter how much she wished for it, hit her like a wave, and her chest tightened. But Naomi was no stranger to the fact that change was inevitable. Time was something no one could control, and as difficult as it was to let go of the past, she also knew that it was part of life's natural rhythm. Life moves fast, she murmured to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. She thought of the years ahead, the milestones her children would reach, the new experiences they would have, the people they would become. She couldn't stop the inevitable, but what she could do was make sure they were ready for it. Her thoughts were interrupted when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned and saw David standing behind her, his presence a quiet comfort. There was a softness in his eyes, an understanding that only someone who had lived through so many years with her could recognize. He knew exactly what she was feeling. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, gentle, as if he was afraid to disturb the delicate moment. Naomi nodded slowly, giving him a small smile, but there was a glimmer of something deeper in her eyes, something both tender and bittersweet. "Yeah, just thinking," she replied, her voice shaky, as though it had taken all her strength not to let the emotion take over. "Thinking about how fast they're growing up. It's like I blink, and they're not babies anymore. I'm so proud of them, but it's hard to let go of the little moments, you know?" David stood next to her for a moment, his hand gently squeezing her shoulder in silent support. He didn't need to say anything, but after a few beats, he spoke, his voice steady and warm. "I know exactly what you mean. It's hard to watch them grow. But we've done something right, Naomi. Look at them. They're happy. They're healthy. And they know they're loved. We've given them everything they need to face the world." Naomi turned toward him, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, the weight of the years, of everything they had been through, seemed to settle between them, unspoken but understood. Her heart swelled at his words, and she felt a rush of gratitude for the life they had built together, for the family they had created. It wasn't always perfect, but it was theirs, and it was built on love, something she could always count on. "I know we've done our best," Naomi whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. I want to hold on to them, to these moments, a little longer." David smiled softly, his hand moving from her shoulder to rest on her back, pulling her in just a little closer. "You won't miss anything. You're right here, and so am I. We're in this together." Naomi smiled, her heart feeling a little lighter as she leaned into him. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she murmured, her voice full of warmth and love. David's smile deepened, and his voice was filled with conviction. "You'll never have to find out, Naomi. We're a team, remember? And together, we'll face everything life throws at us." The quiet moments stretched between them, and Naomi felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over her. There was no need to rush, no need to cling to the past. They were moving forward together, and that was all that mattered. The future was unknown, but as long as they had each other, Naomi knew they would be ready for whatever came their way. As the night deepened and the house grew quieter, Naomi sat beside David, their fingers intertwined. The twins were in bed, their soft breaths filling the silence, and the world outside seemed so far away. In this moment, there was nothing but love, and in that love, Naomi found her strength.